Yes, we're ready.
Okay, great. The Cuyahoga County Council Committee of the Whole meeting for Tuesday, September 28th, 2021 is now called to order. Andrea, would you please call the roll?
First, as a reminder, I would like to make sure everyone knows that all in attendance, this is a meeting that is being recorded and live streamed on the Cuyahoga County YouTube page. Calling the roll, Ms. Stevens, Ms. Simon, they're both absent at the moment. Ms. Baker, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Mr. Sweeney,
Present.
Mr. Tuma,
Here.
Mr. Gallagher,
Here.
Mr. Schron,
Here.
Ms. Conwell,
Present.
Ms. Brown,
Here.
Council President Jones.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you, Andrea. Andrea, is anyone signed in for public comment?
No public comment has been received.
All meetings of the Cuyahoga County Council are open to the public under the Ohio Open Meetings laws. Under that law, council may go into executive session during a meeting for specifically authorized purposes. During executive session, council confers outside of the hearing of the public. Council may not make any decisions about any matters in executive session. All decisions are made in public. This afternoon, the council will go into executive session to discuss a collective bargaining matter. During this time, our live stream will be down, and we ask those not specifically needed for the executive session to remain in council chambers. Council members will convene in the adjacent committee room A and will re-enter the meeting once the executive session is ended. Is there a motion to go into executive session for the purposes of discussing a collective bargaining matter?
So move. Second.
It's been properly moved and seconded. Will the clerk call the roll on the motion to go into executive session?
Ms. Baker, Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Yes.
Mr. Tuma,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Schron,
Yes.
Ms. Conwell,
Yes.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens is absent at the moment. Ms. Simon is absent at the moment. Council President Jones.
Yes.
Motion carries.
The ayes have it. We will adjourn the meeting for an executive session. We are reconvening the council meeting and we are now back on the record.
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I would like the record to reflect Ms. Simon is in attendance.
excellent, excellent. This time, items referred to our committee, our confirmation hearing.
I'll read the item into the record. Resolution 2021-0209, confirming the county executive's appointment of Lenora M. Lockett upon her taking the oath of office as Director of the Department of Equity and Inclusion.
All right, welcome to the confirmation hearing at which council will consider the appointment of Lenora Lockett as Director of the Department of Equity and Inclusion. For a little background, the Department of Equity and Inclusion and the powers, duties, and qualifications of the Director of the Department were established through ordinance in the Cuyahoga County Code. It is our understanding that Ms. Lockett is currently serving as interim Director of the Department, and will be made permanent pending the confirmation by council. The hearing process will proceed as follows. The nominee will be offered an opportunity to address her qualifications, motivations for seeking the position, and outlooks and plans regarding the office. Council members will then be offered the opportunity to ask questions of the nominee. We do so in rounds, allowing each council member to ask 2 questions per round until all council questions have been answered. Once all questions have been asked, we will entertain a motion to recommend that council approve or reject the nomination at today's council meeting. Thank you, and let's begin. In fact, let me take a moment to again acknowledge that today is Lenora's birthday. Happy birthday.
Thank you, thank you.
All right. That's your birthday present from us. All right. And our clerk has already read the record, the resolution into the record. So at this time, Lenora, we will turn it over to you to address council.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Council President Jones. Thank you for this opportunity to present my qualifications and my vision for the department. For the record, my name is Lenora Lockett, and as you stated, I've been serving as the interim director of the Department of Equity and Inclusion since June 1st. I'm honored to have this privilege and opportunity. I want to first thank County Executive Armin Budish for nominating me for this position, and I also would like to thank Mike Chambers, Fiscal Officer, for his support. Overall, I would also like to thank my family, friends, colleagues, and peers for their positive impact on my development personally and professionally. And finally, I would like to thank you, County Council, for considering this nomination today, this confirmation. I was born and raised in Cuyahoga County. I attended Cleveland Public Schools from kindergarten through 7th grade. I then attended East Cleveland Public Schools from 8th grade through 12th grade and graduated from Shaw High School. Upon graduation in the fall, I went to the Vanderbilt University School of Engineering. I studied and majored in civil engineering and graduated with a Bachelor's of Engineering degree. I was fortunate to be able to come back to this community and start my professional career. I had an opportunity the summer before my senior year in college to intern at a private engineering consulting firm, Burgess & Nyepel Limited. During my senior year, I guess it was mutually beneficial. They offered me a permanent position as a design engineer, so I was able to come back home to the community I love and be with my family. Approximately 2 years from there, I applied and accepted and was hired in a position with the Cuyahoga County Engineers Office, which is under the former forward government. It was part of the prior component of the Public Works Department. At the County Engineers Office, I was hired in the Planning Department. The Planning Department was responsible for all the tasks that are needed to proceed with an infrastructure project. So that included making preliminary scope of work, providing preliminary cost estimates for that proposed scope of work, It included coordinating with municipalities for any legislation that was needed for those projects. It also included, as part of developing the scope of work and the funding, that cost estimate was working with the various entities for the funding for those projects. So that included coordination with NOACA for most federally funded infrastructure projects. It also included coordination with the County Engineers Association of Ohio for bridge projects. And also there was the Ohio Public Works Commission. So if we were going to pursue grants for those projects, that included that coordination with that part of the funding package also. In addition, if it was determined that the project was not going to be designed in-house, it included the consultant selection and hiring process for the consultants to do the actual design. So that's where my government experience for procurement started. Also, as part of the funding source with NOACA, I gained experience realizing the diverse needs. It's not just a roadway project. So a roadway project in Lake County is different than a roadway project in Cuyahoga County. They have different impacts, different factors, but they're all seeking understanding, funding from the same pot of money. So again, you had to maximize your collaboration, coordination, having an understanding of the diverse needs of different areas and communities. As my time developed, my experience developed at the engineer's office, I also ended up being the primary presenter to Board of County Commissioner meetings for all Cuyahoga County Engineer Office agenda action items. And also, because the county has a wide spectrum of projects and needs that are embedded with different functions and different criteria, there was often a lot of multidisciplinary discipline and also multi-agency task force to address certain issues. So again, you realize that while you're thinking it's just a bridge, or you're thinking you just do this component, a silo for your agency, it has an impact on the lifestyle and of different parts of the community. So again, collaboration, having a good understanding of all the needs, and being able to do your component and take into account the impact that it has on other parts of the overall project is important. In 2008, the director of the Office of Procurement and Diversity retired, and I applied and was hired by the Board of County Commissioners for that position. At that time, the Office of Procurement and Diversity only entailed the supplier diversity component, and it included the purchasing component. At that, 2 years later, there was a change in the form of government, and the clerk of the board's office became part of the Office of Procurement and Diversity. So that was where the agenda component was added to the procurement and diversity. Some of the major projects that was provided, done under the Office of Procurement and Diversity there was 2 upgrades of the agenda management system. There was also the disparity studies. There were 2 done, and that proceeded in us going from a small business enterprise program in 2016 to us going to in 2016 proceeding with a minority business and women business enterprise component to that program. In addition, as you're aware, last year, there was the implementation of the ERP system in 2 phases. And prior to that, there were 2 upgrades to the agenda manager system. So again, it was collaboration internally with other departments, collaboration externally for initiatives to get those projects from development to implementation. During my time as developing as professionally, I also decided to go back and pursue an MBA. I eventually received my MBA from Cleveland State University's from their School of Business. I've also maintained my professional engineering license, even though it's not required for my current position. That is my foundation and my training is engineering. I love problem solving. As it relates to this position, I also, for process efficiency and flow, have achieved the Lean Six Sigma Green Belt designation. And also, as it relates to equity and inclusion, I've achieved the Master Compliance Administrator certification from the American Contract Compliance Association. The ACCA is a national organization that has membership from the private sector and both the public sector. and their focus is on workforce equity and also purchasing and contracting equity. The ACCA provides an annual 1-week-long comprehensive training that if you can pursue 2 certifications. There's the Contract Compliance Association Administrator certification that takes at least 2 years to achieve, and there's the Master Compliance Administrator certification that takes 4 years to achieve. So I've achieved the Master Contract Compliance Administrator certification from the ACCA. Some of the classes, that certification is audited and monitored by Morgan State University. Some of the classes that I took to achieve and obtain that certification include implicit bias training, training on disparity studies, best practices, and initiatives to promote workforce and contracting equity in those areas. In general, I strive to be a team player, accountable and transparent. I'm probably known for providing too much details, but my goal is to provide more information so that it can be filtered out. I approach people with respect and expect the same. I also have an understanding that in order to come to good solutions, you have to be respectful and open to hearing all sides of a project or issue so that you can come to a solution that's mutually beneficial. My vision for the department is obviously, first of all, to comply and fulfill the requirements detailed in the ordinance creating the Department of Equity and Inclusion. As you know, that includes increasing MBE, WB participation. It includes building capacity within our workforce to promote this equity and advance equity in our everything that the county does, and also to make sure that we're implementing initiatives to recruit, to hire, to develop, retain, and to promote a diverse workforce. And also includes providing services that engage the community and providing ombudsman services so that if there are inquiries or issues that we can address those as part of that process. Finally, as stated in the county orders, it requires us to facilitate the disparity study every 5 years. And part of that process is when those studies are completed and provide recommendations that I am to work with the Equity Commission and the Citizens Advisory Commission and the county executive to evaluate those recommendations and come up with a plan to implement those in a narrowly tailored fashion. My vision basically includes attacking those strategies in 3 key areas. First, there's the supplier diversity area, where we're obviously implementing best practice and initiatives to increase participation by minority businesses, women businesses. Then there's promoting workforce equity, which again is through training and also implementing best practices so that we can have a diverse workforce throughout each of those layers. And finally, through equity, evaluating equity in our policy, programs, and services to make sure that we are not having an unfair, disparate burden on certain portions of the community, and also that to remove any barriers to those all communities that need those services, make sure that they have the access to those services. And finally, to make sure that there isn't a disparity in the benefits, so to make sure that there's an equitable benefit to our programs, policies, and procedures. On my timetable or major tasks to do within a near time frame to promote and advance equities, first, between now and the end of the year, plan to implement the 2020 disparity study recommendations. Right, the current process is that we're proceeding with the county council approval and review of the proposed upgrades to the small business enterprise program, the minority business and women business enterprise program. And if those are approved, we will proceed with training internally the county procurement staff and also training vendors on changing those policies and procedures. The next thing is I'm coordinating and working with HR and some other members of the task force to complete the hiring and selection process for a consultant to provide racial equity and inclusion training to county executive and department staff and leadership. Also, we're working to develop our first diversity, equity, and inclusion scorecard, where within the 3 categories I mentioned previously, we're going to have performance factors, metrics that we were going to evaluate to determine how we're making progress in each of those three areas: supplier diversity, workforce equity, and equity in how we implement our programs, policies, and procedures. Finally, I'm also working with a cross-departmental team that includes Department of Development, Department of Public Works, to implement the equity zone policy in accordance with the executive order issued by the county executive. That policy will provide additional consideration to equity projects that are impacted, that are in equity zones that will be determined by that team, what will comprise of an equity zone, and also we're developing a policy on how to make sure that there's consideration to those equity zones when we pick projects, when we pick development projects, and/or provide the terms and conditions for those funding for those type of projects, so that there's an additional consideration for equity zones, which are in general going to be areas that have been historically overlooked or have had historical disinvestment. Also, I wanted between now and the end of the year is to create our inaugural equity impact assessment tool that can be used to evaluate our policy, programs, and procedures through an equity lens, so that we can see how we're impacting the various communities in our Cuyahoga County. And finally, this year, there's the draft of the equity report for 2022. So those are the major tasks that are on our to-do list between now and the end of the year. Going into 2022, we plan to, now that we have the draft equity report, we want to finalize it so that we can comply with the county code's requirement to issue it by January 31st. If we are successful at getting the consultant hired to provide the training between now and the end of the year, our goal is to have that contract, the notice to proceed, provided to that consultant so that we can provide that training throughout next year to county employees under the executive's office, under the county executive's authority, and also to leadership under the county executive's authority. In addition, as part of the DEI scorecard, once that scorecard is, the inaugural scorecard is created, we want to provide training internally to departments so that they know what the performance measures are and how they're going to be evaluated to see if we're on track or making progress toward our equity goals and initiatives. And finally, working with the director of HR, we're hiring a consultant for the first initial training, but I need to work with the HR director so that we can determine and develop a long-term training plan for equity and inclusion initiatives. Again, we want to be able to, at some point, do a refresher for the existing employees, and also be able to provide the opportunity for new employees and new leadership to also be trained on our expectations for equity and inclusion. Starting in 23 and beyond, that's the year that we will budget. At that time in the summer of 23, we'll start getting ready for the budget for the calendar years 24 and 25. And that'll be the timetable when we'll be coming before, as part of that budget, for the next disparity study. The goal is to do it every 5 years. The current consultant, the study was hired in 2019. 5-year would be to give them notice to proceed for the next study in 2024. Also, in general, with that time frame is the continuous improvement. The goal is to always be, as I call it, a living organism. You don't want to be like Darwinism or the dinosaurs. You don't want to create an initiative and not evaluate and review and determine if you're still making an impact or what changes you need to make so that you can have progress and make improvements on how to do better and get better results. So that completes my opening statement. I'm open to any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. So we will, as I mentioned earlier, there will be 2 questions per councilman per round. And I will start with the first 2 questions. Again, they are prepared, and the first question has pretty much parts A, B, C, and D. So but same thought in the question. So I'll read the first one. Describe the organizational chart of your department. What is the reporting structure? To whom do you report? And who is the role in hiring the staff in your department? So again, first, describe the organizational chart of your department?
So the current organizational chart for Department of Equity and Inclusion includes 9 FTEs. The department will be led by a director, a senior administrative assistant, and a senior contract compliance officer will report to the director. There will be 6 contract compliance officers that will report to the senior contract compliance officer. In accordance with the county code for the department, the director reports directly to the fiscal officer. As far as hiring, follow the process that's in place for PRC and HR department. We've, since I would say this year, we've been filling, there were 4 vacancies, and we're in the process of hiring for those. There's one last vacancy. That person is supposed to start October 4th. The other 3 positions started July, in mid-July. That structure, the hiring process followed was the PRC HR process and with ultimate approval by the fiscal officer.
Okay. And I think I heard you report to Director Chambers. Is that correct?
Yes.
Director Chambers. Excellent. I'll say this as with this department, it's certainly something this council has supported. It has its opportunities for success, but it also can have pitfalls. Okay. I don't expect you to know everything today that you will need for success, but what I do expect over the coming weeks, months, and years, that what you do need, you still have the opportunity to come to this body, and I expect you to share with us what you need to be successful so that we know in real time what we can do to make sure that you are being set up to win and nothing else.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. The second question, again, has those same. What are the current staffing levels for the Department of Equity and Inclusion? Is the department fully staffed? If not, how many vacancies are there? What is the current budget for the department? What is the funding source of the department? Do you believe the current budget staff levels are adequate? And I can repeat any of those if you need. But again, the first part was what are the current staffing levels for the Department of Equity and Inclusion?
Thank you. So again, currently we're budgeted for 9 FTEs.
Yes, 9.
There's 7 people currently in permanent positions. There were 3 that were hired since June, and 3 were hired in July. We have a 4th that's scheduled to start October 4th, Monday. And then there were existing personnel that transferred from the Department of Procurement and Diversity. So they're the senior contract compliance officer and the senior administrative assistant were on the org chart for Department of Procurement and Diversity. And there were 2 existing contract compliance officers that were also part of the diversity. Those 4 were transferred over. And that was done first. The budget was approved by County Council for the department in, I believe, July. And then in the August 3rd meeting, there was a transfer of the portion of the budget related to the personnel that were transferred from Procurement and Diversity over to the Department of Equity and Inclusion. The budget for Department of Equity and Inclusion also includes the original dollar estimated amount for the racial equity and inclusion training. And my understanding is that 250 of that will be 250,000 of those costs for that training will be reimbursed by, up to 250,000 will be reimbursed by HHS levy funds. The remainder of the budget will be general fund, and the estimate for the remainder of the year for the budget for the Department of Equity and Inclusion, including salaries and contractual obligations and miscellaneous expenses, is approximately $967,000.
Okay.
And I guess, I'm sorry, the last component was, at this moment, as you stated, I do feel that it's adequate with my understanding and knowledge at this point. And my goal is always to maximize and leverage technology. And so I will do a lot of assessments, and won't just by default ask for more. I try to make sure that first I take advantage of leveraging any technology, only because I know that for Cuyahoga County, we have a lot of needs and a lot of critical services that need to take place.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions? Councilwoman Conwell.
On your point, Mr. Chair, to Director Lockett, I just want to get clear. You said 950 overall from the general fund. Is that inclusive of the 250 training from the HHS levy dollars?
Yes, the 967 is the total, and up to 250, depending upon how that contract, the final negotiated price, up to 250 can be reimbursed from HHS levy fund.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Oh, and if you want me to continue, oh, man. Also, an earlier comment from the president, he stated he would like you to come before us, and which you've been very good at doing so in the past. That was one of my questions. How often do you plan on reporting, and would that be to the Public Works Committee?
Yes, I'm willing to come to whichever committee I'm invited to. It tends to be Public Works and because that was the procurement contracting committee, so that was usually the more applicable for the services under diversity. But again, I'm here to provide the information, whatever committee is asked.
Okay. Second question would be, what is your impression of the authority that your department is granted, and how will you ensure that the other executive departments adhere to and follow your recommendations?
Yes, so the department my department reports to the fiscal officer, so it's not at the highest level. I'm not reporting directly to the chief of staff or to that effect. However, I believe that doesn't mean I can't be effective. I believe first there's been a clear message from both the resolution that was passed by County Council last year and from the county executive, the equity and inclusion, advancing and improving those principles, that our performance in those areas is important. So that's the top down is stating that that's a high priority. Second of all, I wanted to work with my peers that first, to know that that's a common mission we're all working for, and the goal is to have a countywide effort to prioritize equity principles in all that we do. Now, what I rely upon is my skills as a project manager. When I was in the engineer's office, as a project manager, you're responsible for taking a project from conception to end. So that can be the phases. There's going to be a director or a supervisor that's over surveying. There's a supervisor that's over the bridge design department. There's a supervisor that's over the highway design department. So as a project manager, you're not the supervisors for those departments, but you're still responsible for working with each entity to complete the overall project. And what you have to do is have an understanding of how each department works and what their goals and mission are for their component of the project, and make sure that those are fulfilled, so that when it gets to the next phase, those options can also be fulfilled. So similarly here, I'm not going to be the expert on development issues. I'm not going to be the expert on HHS services or the sheriffs, but however, I'm the champion for the equity and inclusion, and I know and believe that you can do those services and missions in an equitable fashion, and taking it and make sure that you're not having a disparate impact in the negative way or in a positive way, that one group is left out or not fully getting the benefit of those services and goods.
Any further questions? Councilman Miller.
Mr. Chairman, to Lenora, first of all, your performance and dedication to Cuyahoga County is legendary, and I would be ready to vote for you for this without even having a hearing. But since we're here, I have two questions, and they're both hard, and they're not on the list.
Okay.
The first question is, what one new initiative, strategy, or approach do you think has the potential of being the most beneficial in terms of improving equity and inclusion in Cuyahoga County?
I would have to say I've been hearing a lot that I believe that workforce, that there's a lot of good employees here at the county. I believe that you have to leverage that as a resource. And I believe there's a lot of people who get hired, but they may not feel like they're given an opportunity to advance. So I believe anything that we can do to make sure that we can provide an equitable way for people to be promoted and developed provides the opportunity for people to shine and for us to take advantage of those strengths. Some of the things that I've researched that they talked about is one, and I had a conversation maybe about a week ago with the director of the risk department. First, we talked about mentorship, not just mentoring where someone explains to you what they did, but actually having an advocate, someone that's going to push for your career development and get you to the table where you can provide opportunities to demonstrate your capacity. A lot of times, some type of mentorship or advocate, they're calling it advocate or sponsorship project, and also some type of leadership, a broad leadership training where it's not just a silo, but because again, skills can be transferred. For instance, I'm an engineer, but I'm not working in engineering, but the problem solving, that analytical and skills can be used in another area. And it took someone opening me up to an opportunity in another area instead of just thinking that it had to be only in the engineer's office. Those skills can be in other areas, but if people don't have that opportunity and understanding about or have some type of leadership program where people who have that capacity are being nurtured so that maybe they are in, for example, a social worker in HHS, but their skills can be transferred to another area as a leadership, but because they don't have access or sponsorship or advocate, they're not viewed as having that capability. So some type of way to have a broad leadership training component that's not just within a certain silo, that can make people have opportunities in other areas, provide other access. That would be one area.
Okay, thank you very much. And my second question is whether the efforts of the Department of Equity and Inclusion are going to be limited only to working within the confines of Cuyahoga County government, or is your department going to be doing things to enhance equity and inclusion in the broader community? And if so, what would those efforts look like?
I would hope that they aren't limited. There's obviously certain authority. So if they expand beyond that authority, it's more of collaborating and also sharing best practices. But first, I want us to not only for example, with our equity and supplier diversity, we only award approximately through our RFP, RFP, and RFQ process, we only award approximately 100 plus RFBs and RFQs. But right now, there's at least 400 MBEs, WBEs that are certified with the county. So statistically, our goal is that if we have an inclusive process, that when MBEs, WBEs team with other primes, even if they don't receive that contract, there's an awareness that's increased by those primes that the services and goods that MBE or WBE can provide, that there might be an external contract that they might partner. I partner with you for a RFP with the county. You provide goods and services that I feel are applicable and qualified. I have this other project that's for a private development that I want to team with you. So the whole goal is that we're kind of the example and can be used as an example to build further opportunities on the outside. Also, partnerships could be, we're not the only people that do government contracting. So you need to work with municipalities. You can work with, we do joint outreach events with the city of Cleveland's OEO. We've done joint outreach events with the regional RTA, with regional sewer district. So again, it's not necessarily that it's going to be for only county contracting or county workforce, but our efforts, our work can be examples that others can use, and simultaneously, we can learn from others on what they're implementing. So I guess there's a possibility for it to expand that way also, in addition to collaborating with other entities.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. President. My colleagues, Madam Director, welcome, and happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
I hope it gets better after 5 o'clock for you.
Yes, me too.
I'm just reflecting kind of a little bit on this, because this division was just created, because it's such a mess out there, right? And through the leadership of this council, from the days before I was here, they made it a priority to get the diversity study 1 and diversity study 2. We're going to figure this out, try to move the mountain or the ball up the hill, and it's been very, very hard for the last 200-300 years or so. And you've accepted this. And my question is, I don't want you to feel alone. Do you think you have the team? Do you have the staff? Do you have the council? Because this is something that is long overdue, and it's plopping right on your lap. And you're sitting here by yourself saying, I got it. And I want you to know and tell us, or tell me specifically, or the council president, or our county executive, exactly what you need to be able to help shift the culture that we have currently existing. So if you want to talk about that briefly, I'd like to hear what you have to say. Thank you, Mr. President.
Definitely. I'm excited, but I'm in awe, as you stated, of what's in front of us. It is definitely going to take a united effort. And when I think about it as in, we all don't like change, but what we're asking for is a significant change.
Mm-hmm.
And the issue with change is that you have to be uncomfortable. And what continues on that path of being uncomfortable is that you have to be more uncomfortable with the current state of affairs so that you go through the uncomfortable process of getting better. So right now, this is kind of like the honeymoon phase.
Mm-hmm.
But I've already had discussions with departments, and I'm not pinpointing, but I just want to give an example of collaborating, working, is that some of the times that means we're going to have to reject the contract. That means sometimes a vendor that normally got a contract with the county, but this time didn't comply, we're going to have to say no. And that means that might mean we're not doing a project when we thought we would do the project. I'm not saying it's always going to be that case. We're always going to have to make that uncomfortable decision sometimes to make that uncomfortable progress to get to where we want to be. And so right now, you're right. Everyone's excited, but then it's going to be some discussions that are going to be kind of difficult.
Mr. Chairman, can I continue? Thank you. And that's what I'm trying to drive this home, because you should be the one independent director that we have. Because something, they get no, they'll come talk to somebody else. Somebody else will say, hey, how about this, or hey, about that? That's how we used to do it. And as long as we have a game plan in place, it's tight as can be, we just keep executing, and then over time with the Fannie Lewis law way back in my previous, Frank, all he wanted to do was change the culture. Fannie Lewis got struck down in Columbus, but we're still doing it because we changed the culture of how they do business over there. And I think this is the first significant step. Carve it out as a division or a department and saying this is how we're going to do business in Cuyahoga County under your drive and the president and the executive's direction. So that's how I see it there. And one question on content, Mr. Chairman or Mr. President. Kind of like on Councilman Miller's questions, it's we control what we bid out, right? Hi, company X, here's your thing. You have to get so much of this. We can watch it. We have to report. What about money we give out? So say, I know the Sherwin-Williams is in the paper. They might be coming down tonight. I don't know how actively engaged they are, right now with the county, but there's portion county money, there's portion of state money, there's portion of nonprofit money. What kind of oversight / control do we have from your department regarding money that's part of a larger project, through the chair to Madam Director?
So at this point, I don't have any money to give Department of Equity, but there's, for instance, with the Department of Development, collaborating, as you stated, with them, making requirements in those and making those equity requirements. So for instance, with the Sherwin-Williams, I believe that the first thing we would evaluate is what were their commitments to us as part of that, the funds, if there were funds from the county, and what were those items. So yes, as you stated, the money is where
Yeah.
the decisions are made, and what really is where makes people open their eyes and make change also.
And it doesn't really matter where the money's coming
Right.
from. It could be from economic development. Your job is to, your responsibilities are to make
Exactly.
sure they comply. If it's from
Exactly.
public works, your job is to make sure it's whatever it is,
Right,
our county dollars will be protected under the inclusion and equity contract that we have, and we're gonna try to enforce it. And if they don't like it, they're
Right.
gonna have to do business elsewhere. That's how I wanna frame it
And-
for us.
and
So thank-
correctly.
So thank you. And just, were you from a protected position and going to a non-protected, or were you
no, it was still,
appointed both,
yes,
discretionary both ones?
correct.
Okay,
yes.
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions?
And I just wanted to add, my point that the Department of Equity does not provide the loans is that I need to collaborate and make sure that the other department who is responsible for that decision includes that we're both collaborating to make sure that those equity initiatives are in, that we're both on the same page, and it's making sure that there's accountable, even though that sometimes the vendor will feel that the department,
Yeah, I
I'll
want to
have
call
to
it,
deal with equity, but if
I
we're
want to
on
call it a
the
little bit
same
more than
page.
collaboration.
Right,
It's a
exactly.
stronger word.
Exactly, yes.
You're gonna, this is how the contract's gonna be executed, because
Correct.
these are the rules that we set up, and equity is and inclusion is the driving force besides that component of the contract.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Further questions?
Thank you, Mr. President. In your remarks, I think you mentioned diversity as far as minority business and female business. Is that, I didn't hear any other businesses. Would there be veterans? Would you be measuring the number of veteran-owned businesses, or those with second chance who started a company from nothing and be coming back? Would those be part of a diverse business mix that you would be looking to?
So they could be. Right now, we have the categories of small business enterprise and minority and women business enterprise. If those are considered, so there's two categories for supplier diversity. There's race and gender neutral. So veterans, the second chance reentry, or
Yeah, right.
those could be part of a SBE or a race and gender neutral component that could be implemented to evaluate. Yes.
But they have to be one of those, they have to be part of those two in order to be?
Currently, we do not have. That does not mean that I could definitely investigate using that as an opportunity for another category certification.
Because certainly with all of our veterans coming back from Afghanistan and stuff like that, they're struggling as much as any other business out there to get started. And it would seem to me that that veterans ought to be included in your diverse application review out there, and second chance individuals who really struggle to put together financing and what it takes to get that breakthrough contract out there would be something. And then on the inclusion side, how about like autistic employees and special needs employees? Are they part of the inclusion definition?
As far as the diverse workforce, that we would go by, I believe it's Title VII. So yes, so the disability, I believe, is one
So
of those.
disabilities would be part of a measuring stick as far as employees that, does the organization hire,
Diverse, yeah.
do they hire
I know that
those
there's a-
individuals that would be in our Title VII? Do they hire, and what's, I've never seen that being recorded as a head count on things that come before us. And it would seem to me that those individuals clearly need to have somebody stepping up and representing them, whether they be a special needs or an autistic individual, because they're certainly part of our groundwork. And so I very rarely hear any of those groups being mentioned, but they need somebody to carry. If you're going to carry the torch for a lot of other folks, we should be carrying the burdens for those special needs and those autistic individuals that are in our workforce out there. And I hope that they would be included in the definition when we define inclusion out there. in that
That's
respect?
definitely under HR components, yes, definitely.
Okay, and of the 7 that we just hired, do we have any that would fall into those categories that you just hired for your department? There's special needs, autistic, veterans, second chance, or any of the 7 that you just hired in those categories? And I hope
You mean the 3, the 4?
the 4, yeah, that I just listed. Or I think you indicated you had 7 in your department when I thought I heard the
So
question.
some of them were existing employees that were transferred over. There were 3 additional employees that were hired in July, and one that was in the process of, I guess they're hired, but they don't start until Monday. So the 4 additional employees that were hired, I'm not aware of which of those categories they would fit.
I appreciate knowing that because again, they make up a major portion or a large part of our county workforce or opportunities, and it would be great if inclusion was including all those sectors out there. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councilwoman Baker.
Thank you. And Lenore, I'm very impressed by your background and your initiatives and ambitions and perseverance. Just remarkable in your opening remarks, what you have done to date. And I know the little bit of interaction that we've had through Public Works and things, always professional, and look forward to you continuing in this new position.
Thank you.
The question I guess I have, and I've mentioned it before, is that with the new Department of Equity and Inclusion and taking it away from procurement, under that model that we initially had, you were all under one umbrella, and now we've got a separate. Is there any concern there that the relationships or the interactions that happen under one department could be perhaps more distant and not as collaborative as perhaps what you're used to?
Thank you for the question and your compliments. Yes, there's always that concern when something is not under your authority. When something's under your authority, you do have immediate control. When something is no longer under your authority, you have to supplement that lack of control with better collaboration and cooperation. Now, I don't foresee a problem with the current in the near future, because obviously we already have a working relationship, and also with leadership, there's the commitment that equity is important, whether it's a separated department or not. And the point of separating the department was to be able to provide more focus on those initiatives, but that is not, basically you have to continually work on a relationship. You don't just have a good relationship, a good collaboration, and do not do anything to nurture it and stay intact.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question then. The lack of what we hear for employers and in construction and the ability to hire and get qualified workers and that whole scenario of just trying to put a crew together in order to be able to bid. Are you concerned at all on that level of what contractors today perhaps are going through that may be different than what they were even just a few years ago? And to follow up with that, with the those that are trying to put these contracts together in order to get the work done, what are your thoughts about that whole piece that may not be part of the diversity piece, but it's more of how do we just get the job done?
Yes, that is a concern. We changed. There's been a lot of changes that have occurred for just in general for vendors used to dealing with the county. There have been a lot of changes with our procurement process. We changed the supplier portal. We changed, in general, before you even add the equity, we did a significant change with our procurement system and the supplier portal system. Then you add on the pandemic and the stress that companies are dealing with, there is that issue that there's change upon change upon change. And also there's things that are outside of employers that's making the part of their job more difficult. Trying to recruit workers, so they're having to pay higher wages, which is in some ways is great, but also that's transferred to the pricing that the service providers, that they provide for the services. So yes, there is a concern. One of the things that we've noticed is that we're getting, there's been impact on the responses and proposals that we've seen, not just the quantity, but also in the quality. So we've started a multi-department goal initiative to do a how to do business with the county, where we're looking to take the procurement process, look at how we can improve it, make it more efficient. We still have all these different competing needs, but at the same time, we want to look at each of the different areas. If the insurance is a hurdle, if it's the AP process and the pay process, if it's the forms and documents, what do I have to do? What do I have to have notarized? What do I have to have signed? How long is this document good? How do I get registered in an N4? We're trying to take all the different segments of our, unfortunately, complex process and break it down and provide some type of support to vendors that they can go. If you're not, we don't want to have an 8-hour video, but if you're a vendor and you feel like you need assistance for AP, where you can quickly tune in, or maybe a flyer or a quick fact sheet, tips on how to maneuver. So we're trying to find a way to supplement vendors and companies so that they can still participate in our process. While it impacts the overall flow, we think that the 30-day posting gives a longer opportunity so that they don't have to rush as much to submit a bid or proposal, that they could take that opportunity to maybe review a resource or some type of supplement so they can better submit better responses to our bids and proposals. So we are concerned, and we're trying to provide some type of support to make the process a little more user-friendly.
If you don't mind, if I can just follow up just a bit. So I understand it, and I think that would be remarkable if we can help that process along by having how-to type videos for those that perhaps are reluctant to put a bid in because they think it's too cumbersome. But I think I was referring more to just the lack overall of people, that there just aren't enough people out there that are interested in working, especially in labor-type jobs. And these contractors are having a difficult time hiring. How does that fit into what it is that we are now requiring on top of the labor shortage that exists out there? Do you take that into consideration when someone applies, went through the whole, and yet they're short perhaps on meeting the goal, but it's because they just can't get the workers to meet that type of goal that you're outlining? How will you, and then you've got the pressures of getting the job done, of those around you saying, we've got to get this done, it's seasonal, the weather, we have to get this done, we can't be waiting. How will you handle that, knowing that that could occur?
So a part of complying with the diversity and inclusion goal is, first, you can either fully comply. So if you're one of those vendors that lucked up and you were able to find a team that met all the demographics, that's one way. Then there's the partial or compliance, where you were able to meet some of the needs requirements, but you have documentation of your good faith effort. So for instance, if you're pursuing and you're not getting responses back from vendors because of the limited workforce, this company can only respond to 1 or 2 bids, or they didn't respond back to you, then that's what you would document. You can have, so we accept as part of our evaluation for compliance, not only the overall result, which is obviously what we would want, but we also value the effort to try to achieve those goals. So we look at, how did you reach out in advance? For instance, if the bid is due today, you need to reach out at least 5 business days, 7 days in advance, so that that vendor did have an opportunity to respond and they didn't. Document that you called them. And we also confirm, so when we get the tab sheet and you say that you've reached out to 5 businesses, let's say it was trucking, because that's one area that we know that there's been, even when we were recertifying companies, the owners of small trucking companies are telling us that they're having a hard time finding drivers. So when we see that and you can document that you called trucking company A or company B, company C, we also confirm with them, did you receive effort from a call or email from this company asking you to provide these goods and services? Did you respond? Why didn't you respond? So again, our goal is obviously the best day is when you meet all the requirements, but we also are happy and receive value on making an effort to achieve the goal.
All right, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Good luck.
Thank you.
Lenore, welcome.
Thank you. How are you?
I had a question, but I think you just answered it. So really what you're doing, and I find this, and I asked the director and didn't really get a really good response, but equity is one of those words nowadays that can go far left, far right, and the reality is somewhere in the middle. But what I think you just said is this isn't equity in outcome, this is equity in opportunity. So with that, you know, I think you're going in the right direction. The only thing I have to say is we go back to the beginning. And the original HR director was here just last week. And there are certain people that started out with us that have always been there and reliable and trustworthy and honest. And you're one of those people. And while I didn't vote for this new division, I certainly wish you the best of luck and have great confidence in your ability to lead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any further questions? Councilman?
Councilman Sweeney brought up, obviously, the biggest building and construction project that's going to be going on in Cuyahoga County and probably, at least a number of years with Sherwin-Williams. And it was alluded to about economic development. I think you can just substitute public works as easily for purpose of this question. And let's go down the path, and they've done their job. They're supposed to be doing their reviews and audits of the process and projects, and they believe it's meeting the standards, whatever those standards are that we've all agreed to. But you look at it and you say, no, I don't agree with the numbers. And I don't think they are meeting the standards. How does that get resolved?
So obvious, first there is that conversation. If it's our project, our contract, I say, I have a concern about these numbers. Can you clarify? What am I missing? I always approach it as in we're all stewards and with the intent that we're working to do the best for the county and that we're transparent and working with integrity. So I have to have a meeting, have a conversation. Can you explain this to me? Can we see where your understanding of what is equitable meeting requirements, where my understanding of meeting requirements? How can we address whatever the issues or discrepancies are and how you're viewing it and how I'm viewing it? And what we have is what the county is expecting or view. In general, for our current policy, if it was a county project, if that's not reaching, I still have a concern, then obviously I make my report, follow up the chain line for the issue, the matter, and if need be, there is appeal process. There's the grievance hearing board, that if they don't like my decision or my assessment that they comply or not comply, they can take it to the grievance hearing board. Our process with that is that, again, I don't lobby the grievance hearing board for weeks before I say nothing. I have my documentation, and then at that grievance hearing, which is a public meeting, they present their case. I present my case at that time, again, because, again, I want to be transparent and honest. I'm not trying to lobby for weeks to taint the evaluation. I want a fair assessment of where we're not, where there's a misunderstanding.
My question was not with misunderstanding with Sherwin-Williams.
Okay.
Mine was with a misunderstanding of whether it be a public works interpretation of what the agreement was, whether it's a construction project or whether it's an economic development project, and that internally we disagree within the county. Do you overrule and say, we are going to kill the Sherwin-Williams project, for example, if it's an economic development, at least as far as the county is concerned, or does economic development have that authority to say, no, I've made my decision, I hear what you have to say? What is the sequence? I just want to make sure I understand.
I think we would probably take it up the ladder to both of our peers. So in most cases, for instance, like I stated, we just had a similar issue with Public Works. I said, well, I think we should rebid this. I know it's at the end of the construction season. I know you're trying to blah, blah, blah. I presented my case. They presented what they were trying to do. And we, in that case, in this situation, we worked out a solution where we're going to rebid it. Let's say it was not the case, and again, we would take that up to maybe if it's not agree to disagree. So we've had where a department has said, hey, I understand what you're saying. However, can we address this on the next contract? Because the current contract, I need to get this done because the deadline is next month or blah, blah, blah. And at that point, depending upon the environment, I might say, okay, but we have an agreement that the next one, we're going to start earlier so that this can't be repeated again. Now, if it's a issue where I feel like it has to be a no, and they're saying it has to be a yes, then we have to take it up to the next level of leadership.
What is the next level in your?
That would be fiscal officer, chief of staff, and county executive.
Okay, so they will be the arbitrator of which is making the correct interpretation of whether it's an ED contract or it's a public works contract. Because you used the term earlier, you would determine grounds for canceling the contract. And I did not know if I was understanding when you use those words, whether you have the ability to cancel the ED, i.e. Sherwin-Williams in this case, or you're canceling a construction project on Public Works, or where does it go? And the answer, at least I think I heard, is neither group is going to, has that, you're going to pass that on up the line, and ultimately your mutual boss is going to be the one who decides it, or right on up to Armin at that point in time.
Correct. So that in the county code, I have the authority to recommend rejecting because an item does not.
Okay, so when you said grounds for canceling, you didn't mean you would actually cancel, it would just be a recommendation to cancel.
Right,
Okay.
and I was more reaching as a team. So we're all the county, so if I say it's not meeting the diversity equity requirements and the Department of Development or Public Works is saying it is, we either can agree and we both decide in the best interest of the county to reject it, or in this case, if we have to take it up that level to get that consensus, then that's what would need to be done.
We're all the county council, and this is going to come as a shock to you. We don't always agree on every item. I know that
Yes.
that's hard
No.
to believe, but.
No, I understand that there will be conversations where I'm recommending, they're not recommending, and for whatever extenuating circumstances or overlying benefits, an alternate decision is made that might be in my favor or their favor, but hopefully overall, and we look back in time, the overall goal was to always promote equity, and knowing that there's some issues where that's not going to be able to be in that on a per instance basis, kind of like the battle and the war. We want to win the war, improve equity and inclusion, but that doesn't mean every battle is won.
Okay, well, and then the second half of the question was, I can see that same thing occurring with the city or any, on a projects of this nature. They're going to have their standards, and they might make a determination X, and you might make a determination Y, and projects of this nature, it would be then there isn't a boss who's going to make that call, but the whole project could still be put in limbo over an aspect like that. And I don't know where that arbitrator is for when you've got conflicts, because you have a funding stack on projects of this nature that are huge. Thank you.
Very true.
Questions? Yes.
You're using the word recommendation, but also requirements, right? How do you make a recommendation for something that's required? Because there's a recommendation, a requirement, a mandate. It seems pretty gray, and this is what I talked about earlier, giving you the authority, not a given, but having the authority to be able to say, this is what we as a county has agreed to, and this is how you play, this is how you interact
Right.
with the county, and this is a requirement to do business with us. And then you're making a recommendation. Or is it a recommendation that is a recommendation, and it could be talked to with the Department of Public Works or Department of Economic Development? So I'm just trying to get it as tight as possible so I know what you're walking
Okay.
into, so I can help understand how I could be helpful to changing the culture. And every time we leave those words open, and every time we have a little battle, and it could make it a little tougher, a little weaker, but it's not moving it the way we want. So
Right.
I just,
So-
the requirement and mandate and recommendation, you talk about briefly about the thought process in my brain. That'd be hard to probably get into.
So with bids, there's a price preference. So what the price preference states is that for bids where we're doing lowest and best, that the price preference basically states that within, depending upon the lowest technically responsive bid, we're willing to go within this price preference to find a bidder that complies with the diversity goals. So you evaluate each bidder based on whether or not they met the goals. And then if the lowest bidder does not, they're technically responsive, but they did not meet the diversity goals. And then, and within that, when I say they did not meet the diversity goal, that means they're not compliant, which means they could be compliant based on good faith effort. So I evaluate each bidder based on whether or not I felt they were compliant or not with diversity goals, which means that they either met the goals by having subcontractor participation and or they met part of the goals and showed good faith effort to meet the goals. So then there's that designation. So then if the low bidder is not compliant because I felt they didn't have good faith effort, the price preference says that you can go within, let's say it was a $5 million project, you can go within 8% of that low bidder to see if there is a bidder that is not only technically responsive, but also compliant in my evaluation. So that's why there is a requirement as a part of as determining whether or not they're compliant, but there's still that latitude based on the price preference, whether or not they can still be awarded the contract. And in some instances, just because you're allowed to accept the low bidder, because there isn't a bidder that's compliant within that percentage, doesn't mean we have to award. Because then there's also that last statement that we put in almost every document is that the county has the right to waive formalities in the best interest of the county. Because there are certain things that might be, we try not to really exercise that because then that kind of like you're stating, that can, if you do it too often, then it basically becomes that whenever we want to change the rules, we'll change it after the fact. And that's never good as far as being transparent and accountable. And also people want to know upfront what are, as you're stating, the requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I mean, this is heavy duty for you. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councilwoman Conwell?
Through the chair to Director Lockett, Cuyahoga County has had success in entry-level hiring for minorities and females, but there needs to be an increased focus on retaining and promoting those minority and female employees, including at the highest levels of management. How do you plan to work with both the Personnel Review Commission and Human Resources to achieve these goals?
So as far as it relates to the Personnel Review Commission, they're responsible for the the component that deals with the job descriptions.
Yes.
And also with the testing. They work with the departments. So first you want to make sure that when departments work with the Personnel Review Commission for job descriptions, that they're not overly based on requirements that are overly high for the position. You want to make sure that your job description speaks to the qualifications that are required to do the job, but you want to make sure that it's also usually a comparable working experience. If you put in a degree requirement, that there's a comparable working experience equivalent so that you have a broader audience of people that qualifies. That's getting them in the door. The other thing you want to do is make sure, as part of the training, is try to make people more aware of their implicit biases. We all have biases, but you want to make sure that your implicit biases are not overly or adversely impacting who you're evaluating as competent or capable of providing or doing a job. So that goes with the development. A lot of times, if people aren't given the opportunities to demonstrate their skills or to be given the opportunity to show their abilities to be to develop, that they get stymied in that job description. And a lot of times it comes with our implicit bias of being comfortable with dealing with people that look like us. Not necessarily that it was overtly intentional. It's just that you have implicit bias that are impacting how you assign work and how you assess who is capable of doing work or being developed into leadership roles. The other thing you want to initiative you want to do is try to have diverse panels on evaluating candidates for promotions in your department. So you want to have obviously personnel from the department, but you also want to look at maybe personnel from another department for another area that can provide a different perspective, that can give you a diverse viewpoint on how to assess that candidates. Also, you want to look at another initiative that I've seen people try is the having a leader, as I mentioned earlier, the leadership development, so that you have people who have determined or demonstrated that they're intent on, they want to progress in their job, and also they open to learning, that you have provide that access and understanding of the county operation, so there is flexibility to move outside of the silo of the department that they're hired in. In addition, some of the initiatives that I think HR is already looking into, the tuition reimbursement that removes the burden financial or lessens the burden financially of advancing and getting better training. You want to look at barriers for even internally for staff development. Like for instance, when we looked at the P card, and as part of the home rule, we had the ability to make the P card more flexible with the departments. They can do use the P card for a certain for instance, like help with staff development as far as paying for hotel rooms, things of that sort. The other thing we tried to do with the travel policy was make sure people come earlier so that they can use that. If they come and get approval to do staff development earlier, then they can get the payments for the hotel rooms paid directly by check. Now, that might seem minor, but there are people who, depending upon your income and your financial situation, you may not be able to front a whole week of hotel expenses at the ACCA conference. Now that means you're behind or don't have that opportunity because of financially, not quality-wise or capability hindered. So you want to remove any barriers to people promoting and developing themselves, either by implicit bias because they're not going to be recommended, or any barriers financially for them to take advantage of those opportunities to advance their career.
May I expand on my questions? You mentioned internal implicit biases. So this department, I know from my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong, was more developed to work on outside contracting and business and trying to work on that. But in your statement, that you just said, kind of sounds like there will be some internal county efforts as well through the departments to look at in moving entry-level females and minorities that we have here within the county to move up for advancement. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, so in the county ordinance, the focus is, one of the primary is the supplier diversity, which is the contracting and the purchasing. But there's also that component that deals with working with HR to build capacity for training for our staff on racial equity and inclusion training. And part of that training, that working with HR, is the training. Part of that training is about implicit biases and how that impacts your, not only how you manage and direct and evaluate personnel, but also it can impact contracting. It can impact how you write policies and procedures. So again, that training should have an impact in all those areas as a manager and employee.
So it's, say, for example, in the area of HR, usually right now, if an employee comes to me, shares something about they're not being advanced, they've been overlooked several times, give several examples, I initially would probably go to the HR director to state that complaint that I've heard, because I'm like you. I don't believe that any of us, we should all be given the opportunity to succeed. So you probably in your position now, I just want to be clear, should I continue that role, or would I come to you, even though it's not proven that it's a racial and equity, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I just want to know who I continue to go to, because trust me, I get a lot, and I try to get off my plate and give it to the proper authorities.
And what I would say is that the departments are still going to be the experts at their area. The HR has personnel that's trained and have expertise in human relations and the equal employment opportunity, all the legislation and requirements for that. So I'm never going to be that expert. But I collaborate with them as far as working on making sure that we're promoting, championing equities, and similarly for development. And also, if there's the Human Rights Commission, so if there's discrimination, they have a process. So when I develop the ombudsman process, it'll be more as if it comes to me, then my goal will be to follow the correct process and procedures. If it looks like it's supposed to go to the Human Rights Commission based on their rules and county code that applies to that, and also with HR to make sure it goes to the experts for resolution.
Thank you. That helped.
All right, we're going to look to go for maybe another 5 minutes. We want to save 5 before our council, just for our clerks and their setup time they need before the 5 o'clock meeting. So are there any further questions? No further questions. All right. All right. All right, well, again, thank you, Lenore, for answering these questions. If there are no further questions, I'll make a recommendation to move Lenore Lockett's nomination to the full council for second reading adoption under suspension of rules, again, at our 5 o'clock meeting. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Moved and seconded. Again, any further discussion? If not, clerk, why don't you give us a roll call, please?
Calling the roll, Ms. Baker,
Yes.
Mr. Miller,
Yes.
Mr. Sweeney,
Absolutely.
Mr. Tuma,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Mr. Schron,
Yes.
Ms. Conwell,
Happy birthday, and yes.
Oh, thank you.
Ms. Brown,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Simon,
Yes.
Council President Jones.
And yes,
The motion carries.
Thank you very much.
congratulations on this part of the process. All right. But at this time, is there any miscellaneous business?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Madam Clerk.
at this time, I would like the record to reflect that Ms. Stevens is in attendance.
All right, thank you. All right, if nothing else holds our attention, our meeting is adjourned. We will reconvene at 5 p.m.